It's a warm summer evening in the 14th century England. The Grand Hall of Westminster Palace glows with the light of 100 candles. Nobles in elaborate silks are dancing to the sound of lutes and harps. The air is heavy with the scents of roasted meats and sweet meat. In a shadowy alcove near the banquet tables, two figures stand dangerously close. Edward II, tall and striking with his sharp features, is whispering intently to Piers Gaveston, his loyal tall companion. Gaveston's hand brushes Edward's arm. Their laughter is soft but loaded with an intimacy that's hard to miss. Suddenly their lips meet in a brief but unmistakable kiss. Suddenly the music falters. Gasps ripple through the crowd as a nobleman steps forward, his face twisted with outrage. He points a finger at the pair.
How dare you shame this court with your indecency?
But before Edward can respond, a sharp intake of breath is heard from the entrance of the hall. It's Isabella, Edward's wife. Her face is a mix of shock and fury as she takes in the sight of her husband and Gaveston. Their closeness is undeniable. Edward straightens, his face calm but his grip on Gaveston tightening. The room is thick with tension.
OMG, no. Did that really happen? And what happened next?
Well, not quite.
Wait a minute. Before you tell me, I have to grab a coffee because this sounds way too good to be true.
Fair enough. I suggest the same to the listeners of this podcast. So grab a coffee, make yourself comfortable, because today we're going to spill all the royalty.
How scandalous.
No way.
I didn't know that.
You're kidding me.
No.
Tell me more about it.
History Gossip, the podcast spilling the tea on history's wildest stories, iconic royal drama, and the most chaotic events.
Welcome, dear listeners, to another episode of History Gossip, the podcast that tracks down the most bizarre stories, habits, or events of history. Today we're diving into the life of King Edward II, a man whose reign was scandalous as it was tragic. I'm Carla, your host for today.
And I'm Julia. So, I want to know the truth. Was Edward really caught in the act with Piers Gaveston at a royal ball?
No. But the rumors about Edward's relationship with Gaveston and Hugh Despenser, another favorite, sparked centuries of speculation and scandal. Today we're diving into all the juicy drama and seeing what's really behind the gossip.
Reality check.
So, who was Edward II before all the drama?
Right, because no one wakes up one day and decides to have one of the most scandalous reigns in history. Spill it, Carla.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. Edward was born in 1284 in Carnarvon, Wales, as the fourth son of Edward I and Eleanor of Castile. He wasn't supposed to inherit the throne. His older brothers were ahead in line, but fate had other plans, when they all died young, leaving Edward as their heir.
So he goes from the fourth son to the center of attention. That must have been a shock.
Absolutely. Edward grew up in the grandeur of the Plantagenet court, surrounded by ceremony and tradition. But unlike his father, who was known for his strictness and discipline, Edward preferred music, outdoor sports like roaring and, get this, raising greyhounds. He even traveled with a pet lion.
A lion? Talk about making an entrance. And then what? He just waltzed into kingship?
Not exactly. Edward I, his father, didn't think much of him as a future king. He believed Edward was too unmanly and more interested in music, roaring and raising greyhounds than ruling. Edward I even tried to toughen him up by bringing in strong role models like Piers Gaveston.
Ugh, talk about toxic masculinity. But wait a minute, who was he and why did he cause so much drama?
Piers Gaveston wasn't just any noble. Edward's father, Edward I, brought him into the prince's household, hoping he would serve as a strong, noble role model for his son. And well, it worked, just not the way the king intended. Gaveston and Edward clicked instantly, forming a bond so close that it would spark decades of controversy and rebellion. So they met when Edward was still a prince, and let's just say sparks flew.
Sparks? Are we talking bromance or romance?
Historians argue about that to this day. Some describe their bond as a deep brotherly love, while others think it was much more intimate. Either way, Edward's obsession with Gaveston caused a lot of trouble.
Okay, but Carla, wasn't there a lot of speculation about Edward and Gaveston's relationship? Like, I've heard rumors about extravagant gifts and even a play about them.
Oh, absolutely. Edward wasn't shy about showing his affection for Gaveston, which fueled a lot of gossip. For example, Edward gave lavish gifts to Gaveston, some of which were intended for his wife, Queen Isabella, and he even seemed to prefer Gaveston's company over hers at times. Chronicles from the period described their bond as excessive and beyond reason.
That's not subtle at all.
Not in the slightest. Their closeness was so well known that Christopher Marlowe, later wrote a play, Edward II, which portrayed their relationship as explicitly romantic. Whether or not it was true, the perception of their intimacy added plenty of fuel to the fire at court.
That's definitely not what his dad planned. I mean, wasn't Jefferson also given some over-the-top honors, like the whole Earl of Cornwall thing?
Exactly. When Edward became king in 1307, one of his first acts was to recall Jefferson from exile and grant him the title of Earl of Cornwall. Huge mistake. The title was traditionally reserved for royalty, and the barons were furious. Jefferson didn't help matters. He mocked the nobles and even gave them insulting nicknames. Imagine calling the Earl of Warwick the Black Hound of Arden.
Not the Black Hound of Arden?
Yes. And things only got worse. The barons eventually captured Jefferson and executed him in 1312.
Harsh. How did Edward react?
He was devastated. Edward mourned Jefferson publicly and vowed revenge. But instead of winning the barons back, Edward doubled down by elevating another favorite, Hugh Despenser the Younger.
Let me guess. The barons hated Despenser too.
Bingo. Hugh Despenser the Younger entered Edward's life in 1318 when he was appointed royal chamberlain. He was actually Edward's nephew by marriage, so their connection started off as political, but over time Despenser became more than just a trusted advisor. If you thought Jefferson caused drama, Hugh Despenser took it to another level. He wasn't just greedy, he was dangerously ambitious. Edward didn't just favor him, he practically handed him the keys to the kingdom.
Wow. Hugh sounds like trouble, but was this favoritism just about politics, or was there something more personal going on between Edward and Hugh?
In many ways, yes. Despenser was even more ambitious than Jefferson, and Edward's favoritism sparked accusation of an intimate relationship between the two. The king gave Despenser lavish titles like Earl of Gloucester and declared publicly that his actions were merely of love. That kind of phrasing raised eyebrows at court.
Hold on. Are you saying Edward basically turned his court into a soap opera with Hugh and his co-star? That's wild. How did people not lose their minds over this?
Absolutely. Chronicles and even the church accused him of immoral behavior. Bishop Adam Orleton of Hereford went so far as to publicly condemn Edward for sodomy, linking his alleged sexuality to his poor governance. Jean Froissart, Chronique, later accused Despenser directly of being heretic and sodomite, and these claims only fueled the barons' outrage.
Wow, it's like the relationship wasn't just a scandal, it was practically a political grenade.
Exactly. And Despenser didn't help his case. He was given vast lands and wealth, often at the expense of other nobles. He even used his power to seize estate from widows and orphans, basically anyone who couldn't fight back. This wasn't favorism anymore. It was outright tyranny, and the barons were livid.
Sounds like he was making enemies left and right.
You could say that. By 1321, tensions exploded into a full-blown revolt. The barons demanded Despenser's exile, and Edward initially agreed, only to bring him back a few months later. This betrayal led to civil war, with Edward and Despenser on one side and the barons along with Queen Isabella on the other.
Wait, so Isabella turned against her husband?
Oh, big time. But their story didn't start with drama. Edward and Isabella were married in 1308, when she was just 12 years old. It was a political match designed to strengthen ties between England and France. Isabella was celebrated for her beauty and intelligence, and for a time their marriage seemed functional, at least on the surface.
Functional? That doesn't sound romantic.
That's because it wasn't. Edward often neglected Isabella in favor of Jefferson and later Despenser, which made her deeply unhappy. She was also jealous of the attention Edward lavished on them. There are accounts of Isabella complaining that Edward spent more time with Jefferson than with her, and even redirected royal gifts to him.
Yikes, I'd be furious too. How did it all fall apart?
Well, by the 1320s, Isabella had had enough. Edward's blatant favoritism toward Hugh Despenser was the final straw. Despenser wasn't just taking over politically, he even encroached on Isabel's own lands and power. She was humiliated and angry, and she made it clear, either Despenser goes or I don't come back to England.
Wait, she gave him an ultimatum?
Absolutely. While on a diplomatic mission to France, Isabella refused to return unless Edward exiles Despenser. But Edward, ever loyal to his favorite, refused. Instead, he doubled down, choosing Despenser over his queen. That was the moment Isabella decided to take things into her own hands.
Bold move. What did she do?
Isabella formed an alliance with Roger Mortimer, an exiled nobleman, and together they started plotting Edward's downfall. Their partnership became as scandalous as it was strategic. In 1326, they invaded England with a small but determined force, and their timing couldn't have been better. Discontent with Edward was already high, and many nobles and barons relied to Isabella's side. The invasion was swift and effective, forcing Edward to flee and eventually leading to his deposition.
So what happened to Hugh Despenser? He didn't get away scot-free, did he?
Oh, not at all. Despenser's downfall was as brutal as his rise was dramatic. After Isabella and Mortimer's invasion, Hugh Despenser was captured while trying to flee. He was put on trial for his crimes, treason, corruption, and even accusations of immorality. The nobles wanted revenge, and they made an example out of him.
Revenge? Sounds messy.
Extremely. In November 1326, Despenser was sentenced to a horrifying execution. He was hanged, drawn, and quartered, a punishment reserved for the worst traitors. His body was mutilated and displayed as a warning to anyone who might follow his footsteps.
That's intense, but I guess it shows just how much damage he caused during this time in power.
Exactly. His greed and influence weren't just about wealth. They destabilized the entire kingdom. With Despenser gone, Isabella and Mortimer solidified their control, though their reign came with its own complications.
Wow. Talk about a royal mess. Despenser's gone, but I'm guessing Edward didn't just retire to a cozy castle and live happily ever after.
Well, Edward didn't exactly ride off into the sunset. After being deposed in 1327, he ended up locked away at Berkeley Castle. At first they kept him alive, probably thinking he could still be useful as a puppet king. But let's be honest, Edward was the medieval equivalent of a third wheel. As long as he was alive, he was a huge liability for Isabella and Mortimer's rule. So yeah, they decided he had to go.
A third wheel, huh? That couldn't have ended well. So what did they do to get rid of him?
That's where the mystery begins. Edward's death is one of the most debated events in medieval history. The most infamous theory is that he was murdered with a red-hot poker inserted into his rectum to burn him from the inside. The idea was that this method would leave no outward marks, so his death could be passed off as a natural cause. It was supposedly a punishment for his sins, but honestly, it sounds like more of a medieval PR move to ruin his legacy.
Wait, so you're saying this whole red-hot poker thing might just be medieval fake news?
Exactly. Most historians think it's propaganda designed to paint Edward as morally corrupt and unfit to rule. The more likely scenario is that he was suffocated, cleaner, quicker, and far less dramatic. But the poker story stuck because, well, it's just so scandalous. It's the kind of tale that grabs headlines even 700 years later.
Wow, that's a lot to take in. Edward's life and death were like one long medieval soap opera, but surely there's more to the guy than just scandals and drama, right?
Oh, definitely. After Edward's death, things didn't exactly calm down. He and Isabella had 4 children, including Edward III, who would go on to become one of England's most famous kings. But in the short term, Isabella wasn't done ruling.
Wait, so Isabella took over? Like, who is this diva?
Yes, so iconic. She ruled alongside her ally, or should I say, boyfriend, Roger Mortimer, since Edward III was still a teenager. The two of them basically ran England for 4 years, but let's just say they weren't winning any popularity contests. Mortimer's greed and arrogance rubbed a lot of people the wrong way.
Oh man, that sounds familiar. So let me guess, things got messy again.
Oh, very messy. By 1330, Edward III decided he had enough. He staged a coup, had Mortimer arrested and executed, and sent Isabella into retirement. But hey, her son went on to bring stability back to the throne and became one of England's great warrior kings, so at least something good came out of all the chaos.
Wow, talk about family drama. But did Isabella and Edward II ever make peace?
Well, here's a weird twist. When Isabella died in 1358, she was buried with Edward II's heart. And not just like near her. It was placed in a little casket and worn around her neck like a necklace. Some people say it was a gesture of love or guilt. But honestly, it's medieval romance at its strangest.
Can't decide if that's sweet or super creepy. However, a heart necklace? Who needs jewelry when you've got that?
Exactly. Medieval royals never did anything halfway. Drama was basically their brand. And hey, dear listeners, since Valentine's Day is just around the corner, here's a little gift idea to impress your loved ones. Just kidding.
Yeah, nothing screams I love you like a casket with an actual heart inside.
Right? But let's stick to the chocolate and flowers, shall we?
Speaking of unaccepted gestures, Edward's life wasn't just about drama and scandal, right? There must be some weird or quirky stuff about him too.
Oh, absolutely. Edward may have had a rough reign, but he also left us with plenty of bizarre and unexpected moments. Let's dive into some fun facts about the king who was anything but ordinary.
I'm intrigued. Hit me with the royal weirdness.
Alright, let's do it. If you want to win your next pub quiz and be crowned the ultimate master of medieval trivia, these Edward II fun facts are guaranteed to give you an advantage. So let's go. Okay, first up. Do you know Edward II was basically the medieval party king? He loved throwing extravagant events from massive feasts to over-the-top tournaments. But here's a wild one. In 1313, during a visit to Pontoise, Edward and his wife Isabella, yes, the Queen, were entertained by Bernard the Fool and 54 nude dancers. I'm not sure if it was a bonding moment for them, but it sure made an impression on everyone else. Imagine the reaction from the nobles. It's safe to say some of them weren't exactly amused.
54 nude dancers with his wife there? That's not just a party, that's medieval TMC material.
Right? Edward's taste for indulgence was infamous. His court became known more for its entertainment than for actual governance. Some thought it was all part of his charm, but most nobles saw it as a distraction and an expensive one at that.
Honestly, I'm still stuck on the dances. What's next?
Oh, this one's a classic. Picture this. It's Edward's wedding day in 1308. He's marrying Isabella of France, known as the Fair. Big royal event, right? But instead of making it all about his stunning new bride, Edward spends most of his time showering his new favorite, Piers Jevston, with attention and gifts.
No way. On his wedding day?
Oh yes. The whole thing turned into a Jevston appreciation party, and he completely ignored Isabella for most of the celebration. Edward gave him extravagant gifts, including a ring, a lavish bed, and even war horses that he would receive from Isabella's father, King Philip IV, as wedding presents. Can you imagine? Instead of sharing those with Isabella, he handed them straight to Jevston.
That's tough. Can you imagine being the queen and realizing your husband is more interested in his bestie than you?
Oh, she wasn't thrilled. And neither were the French nobles. Contemporary gossip said Isabella was second fiddle at her own wedding.
Talk about a royal faux pas. That's some serious drama right out of the gate.
Exactly, it's no wonder this became the talk of the court for years to come. Imagine the whispers in the banquet hall. Isabella's family insulted, the English nobles outraged, and Edward seemingly oblivious to the scandal he had just ignited. It wasn't just a faux pas, it was a royal spectacle that cemented Edward and Jevston's relationship as the center of gossip for the rest of Edward's reign.
Talk about a royal spectacle. I can't believe that was how Edward kicked off his marriage. So, what's the next one?
Oh, this one's a kicker. Literally. Did you know Edward II was one of the first rulers to officially ban medieval football? In 1314 he issued a decree forbidding the game in London. But don't think of football as we know it today. Back then it was more like a chaotic street brawl with a ball thrown into the mix.
Wait, so Edward actually took time out of his royal duties to ban street football? Wasn't he dealing with, wars and rebellions?
Exactly. You would think Edward had bigger problems, but apparently the rowdy chaos of these games was so disrupted that he stepped in. The games weren't just playful, they were rough, often involving entire streets, and injuries weren't uncommon. So Edward declared, no more ball games.
That's wild. I guess he wasn't much of a football fan.
Not at all. It's funny to think this ended up being one of Edward's legacies. Banning football back then was just the start of England's long history of seeing ball games as a source of trouble and rowdiness.
Honestly, I never thought I'd associate Edward II with banning football. What a king!
So Julia, what's a takeaway from Edward II's life?
Honestly, medieval politics were a total mess. But let's be real. History isn't just old boring facts. It's full of wild stories, big personalities, and enough drama to fill a medieval soap opera. And Edward, he knew how to keep things interesting.
Absolutely. But before we wrap up, I think it's important to reflect on something. Edward didn't just face criticism for his politics, he also experienced significant discrimination and hostility because of his relationships and how society perceived him. From our perspective today, it's heartbreaking to think how much of that was rooted in the prejudice of the time.
Totally. It's a reminder of how far we've come and how far we still have to go when it comes to acceptance and understanding.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So, listeners, it's time to drink up your coffee. That's the end of the episode.
But don't worry, we'll be back with more drama. Next time we're talking about, well, you have to tune in to find out.
Until then, keep gossiping about history. XOXO.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to History Gossip. This episode was written by your host, Carla Vordermeier. Co-host, Julia John. Concept and Project Management, Lena Jansa and Melanie Schönberger. Editing, Melanie Schönberger. History Gossip is a project developed by students of the University of Vienna.